Hello, and welcome back to our series where we are building a very basic and simple people and culture management system. This is brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jake Finger, principal consultant here at Prairie HR Solutions. And since our last video, I did a little bit of styling. I changed our spans here to match our branding colors here at Prairie HR Solutions. And I also grabbed a nav bar template from Bootstrap and set this as a placeholder, and of course did the styling there as well. And the approach that I'm using is I am going to create a view or page, would be a good way to describe it, for each and every category that we have. And then if somebody comes over here to, okay, that's a bad example. Let's do total rewards. Now, total rewards has two different options here. And I apologize the way that I'm sharing my screen. You're not actually able to see. Some viewers may not be able to see the drop down list. Hopefully, you're following along and creating something your own. That way, you can see these drop downs work. But total rewards has two. We have benefits and compensation. So my approach is if somebody clicks on total rewards and then selects an option here, it's going to render that page, that view, and then set either compensation or benefits to display block or display none. So these two subcategories will exist in the HTML, but will only be viewable depending on what it is that they select here. And then this nav bar, I'll have a home link. My intent is to have the home link, which brings everybody back home to this page. And then some other links in there, such as company webpage and some other things. Now, I leave the links in a nav bar, personally, I do leave the links in a nav bar kind of alone until I get closer to completing the full structure. That way I can just link everything together towards the end and not have to go back and change things when the project scope changes, which it tends to drift, uh, especially when you start building something and you realize it's a little slow. You're like, ooh, okay, got to fix that, got to change that somehow. So that's what I did since then. And what I would like to do now is I want to work on our authorization. So my personal preference is I will leave comments in my main GS file of next steps and what it is that I want to do. So you'll see in here that I have an authorization via the session. The nav bar I have, it's there, but now I need to link and update. I have today's date in here. I want to grab that and put that on the page. Here's our views that we'll do, and of course the blocks and stuff like that. So what I've done is I've left myself a to-do list essentially. And in this video, I want to grab this authorization via session. I started doing this, but then I thought maybe I'll include it in the video simply because I don't know if y'all have ever done this before. And if we're dealing with an internal network, um, you can check, there's a way that you can check an authorization for an employee's email. Now, um, this isn't a foolproof way, but this comes in handy if you have a team, an HR team that may consist of an administrative function, maybe like a benefits coordinator or something, and you want that benefits coordinator to access a view or part of this, but you actually don't want them to be able to see compensation data or maybe employer union relation data or something like that. So it's a good way that you can authorize people to view certain things through whatever email it is that they log in with. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. And what I've done was in our sheet, I don't want to hard code that. What I'd like to do is inside our sheet here, keep a list of authorized emails. And then depending on what email is gathered, check against this list. And then if it's there, do something. If it's not, do something else, like maybe pop up a screen saying you're not authorized to use this, shame on you, whatever. And then I'd also like to grab that user's name because I thought it'd be nice to have it somewhat personalized on the front end to where it says, welcome, Jake Finger or something like that. So first, let's grab our email from the session. So to do that, let's create a function. And this function can just be authorization. That's what I'm going to name it. Oops. And what we want to do is grab the email of the user working in this session here. So let's create a variable. We'll just call this variable user. And what we want to do is tell Google that we want to work in the session. Now, when you run this the first time, this authorization function, because you're using session, you're going to have to go through that authorization piece that we did the first time. You're going to have to authorize our script to grab the session info. And what we want to do in this session is get the active user. And the active user, we want to get the email. Now let's log this user variable and see what we get. We'll save it so we can select that function that is. And when we run this, you'll see that it grabs, in my case, the email that I used to log in. If you're following along with this, it should be grabbing the email that you used to log in. So now what we can do is, now that we have this user variable, we can check against that list. But first we need to get that list over to our Google Apps script. And to get this, we need to get the values starting at 2, row 2, column 4. And then we want to include however many rows there are and 2 columns. Now I'm going to leave this the way that we did it by getting that last row because I want to illustrate what's going to happen. It's not going to get the last row of this column. It's going to get the last row of this entire sheet. So that means that it's going to come down here and then populate a whole bunch of empty lines. And then we'll handle that here in a second, but let's just do it for illustration purposes. So let's create another variable here. Let's call this let user auth. And we will have that equal to our website data or web app data. We want to get the range. Let's start it. It's starting at row 2, column 4. And we are going to get our web app data, get last row. And we only need 2 columns. And let's get the value of that. And now let's log this out, and you'll see exactly what's going to happen. Okay, so now let's run it. So we have Prairie HR Solutions, that's our first log, and then you'll see our 2-dimensional array here. Each inner array is a row, and it consists of 2 columns. And we have that 1 row, but then it's going down all the way until it gets to the last row with data in it entirely within that sheet. So we don't want that. I mean, we don't want a whole bunch of empty arrays. So there's a way that we can essentially do this by simply getting the last row of data within that column. And it's fairly simple to do. So instead of doing it this way, let's create another variable. And let's call that variable auth last row. That'll work. And what we're going to do is we are going to get a range again. And this time I'm going to use A1 notation. And what the column that I want to get is D, and I want to start it at D1. And then I want to go all the way down D as far as it's going to go. And then I want to get the values of that. And I'm adding the values of it because even though it's a column, it still contains more than one. And then let's essentially find the last bit of data in that array. So let's create another variable and let's call this auth. Let's just call this auth last. And what we're going to do is we are going to take this auth last row and we are going to filter. And this is I'm going to say, I can just call it a JavaScript trick. Filter by the string, which means that it's searching for a string and then it's going to find the length of all that. Now what we can do is in this user auth, we can then do our web app data, get the range, start it to column 4, but instead of this, we simply call that. So now let's save this, double check our work. So we are going to go to our web app data, grab a range. The range is going to be essentially the entire column of D. We get the values of that. And then we are going to go through and take that whole row and we're going to filter by a string, anything that has a string in it. It's anything with data essentially. And then we're going to find the length of that and we're going to put it in an authorized list. Now this length is going to come to us as a number. So when you think about what it's doing, if it's starting here, the length is going to be 2. If we had one like here, which we can play with a little bit later, but it's going to be 2. So it's going to return that number 2. So then we create another variable, our user auth, and then instead of using that get last row, we are essentially using the number, which is the length of the data in that column. Now, since we started at 2, you'll remember that it's going to produce that last row. Let's go ahead and run this and I'll show you what I mean. So, yep, there it is. We have a 2-dimensional array. And each inner array, of course, is the row. And then it has this empty row here because we were starting at the second, but we included every piece of data. So we can simply just -1. Now when we run this, there we go. So now we have a clean list in a 2-dimensional array, of course, of our user email. Perfect. So that's how you get the session. Now I'm not going to do anything with this quite yet, simply because we're going to use this for each and every single page. So we're going to leave that here. And because this is the next piece of creating views, is going to take a substantial time. I'll probably get it done in about 30 minutes, but I don't want to keep it going for this long. So I'm going to end this video here. And I hope that this function snippet here of authorization and getting our active user in our email is helpful because we will be using it in the future to set some authorization views and whatnot. We can simply just change that and whatnot. So I hope this was an informative video for you, and I'm going to continue to play around with this and create some more pages essentially for each one of our pieces as well as a spinner. And we'll start off the next video with a spinner and then work on our views. And then we can start really building out our web pages. So hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time, please take care.